My name is David Chun, and for the past 15 years, I've made my living restoring old photographs. What started as a simple side business helping families preserve their memories has evolved into something far more complex. I specialize in digital enhancement of historical images, using advanced software to bring clarity to faded faces and restore detail to damaged prints. Most of my work involves standard restoration, removing scratches, adjusting contrast, bringing life back to images that time has weathered. But occasionally, I encounter something that defies explanation, something that challenges everything I thought I knew about photography and the passage of time. This particular case began 3 months ago when I received a package from the estate of Margaret Whitmore, an elderly woman who had passed away in a small town called Millbrook, about 2 hours north of here. Her granddaughter had found a collection of old photographs in the attic and wanted them digitized for the family archive. Nothing unusual about that. I get similar requests almost weekly. But when I opened the envelope and spread the photographs across my workstation, one image immediately caught my attention. It was a class photograph from 1929, according to the handwritten notation on the back. The photo showed 32 children arranged in 3 rows on the steps of what appeared to be a rural schoolhouse. The boys wore suspenders and knickers, the girls simple dresses with their hair neatly braided or bobbed in the fashion of the era. Their teacher, a stern-looking woman in her 40s, stood to the left of the group, her hand resting on the shoulder of a small boy in the front row. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Just another vintage school photograph, the kind I've restored hundreds of times. The image quality was remarkably good for its age, though it showed the typical signs of wear you'd expect from a 90-year-old photograph. Some fading around the edges, a few small spots where moisture had damaged the emulsion, but overall, it was in excellent condition. I began the restoration process as I always do, scanning the image at high resolution and opening it in my enhancement software. As I worked to improve the clarity and contrast, I started examining the faces more closely. This is standard procedure for me. I like to study the subjects, to understand who these people were, to bring their stories back to life through the restoration process. That's when I noticed something peculiar about one child in particular, a girl standing in the back row, third from the left. She appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old, with dark hair and large, expressive eyes. What struck me wasn't her appearance exactly, but rather the quality of her image compared to the others. While the rest of the photograph showed the typical grain and slight blur you'd expect from 1929 camera technology, this one child appeared almost impossibly sharp and clear. I assumed it was simply a trick of the light, or perhaps she had remained perfectly still during the long exposure time required by cameras of that era. But as I continued working on the image, enhancing different sections, I began to notice other anomalies. The lighting on her face seemed different from the other children, as if she were illuminated by a source that wasn't affecting anyone else in the photograph. I've been doing this work long enough to recognize when something doesn't add up technically. Photography in 1929 had specific limitations. The film grain, the depth of field, the way light interacted with the emulsion, all of these factors created a particular look that's unmistakable to someone in my profession. This girl's image violated several of those technical constraints. Intrigued, I decided to research the photograph's background. The notation on the back simply said, "Millbrook Elementary, class of 1929, Mrs. Patterson's room." I reached out to Margaret Whitmore's granddaughter, asking if she knew anything about the specific photograph or the children in it. She called me back the next day. Her grandmother had attended that school, she explained, though she would have been too young to be in this particular class. The photograph had been in the family for decades, passed down through relatives. She didn't recognize any of the children specifically, but she mentioned that her grandmother had occasionally spoken about the old schoolhouse and some of the families who had lived in Millbrook during that time. This gave me an idea. I contacted the Millbrook Historical Society, thinking they might have records or additional photographs from that period. The society's director, an enthusiastic woman named Janet Morrison, was immediately interested in my inquiry. She invited me to visit their archives, which were housed in the basement of the town library. The following Saturday, I made the drive to Millbrook. It's one of those small New England towns that seems frozen in time, with a main street lined by maple trees and Victorian houses that have been meticulously preserved. The Historical Society's archives were more extensive than I had expected, with boxes of photographs, documents, and memorabilia dating back to the town's founding in 1847. Janet had pulled several items related to the old elementary school. There were class photographs from various years, school records, and even some personal collections donated by former students and their families. As we spread these materials across a large table, I immediately began comparing them to the 1929 photograph I had brought with me. What I discovered was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. In a class photograph from 1932, 3 years after the original, I found the same girl. She appeared to be exactly the same age, standing in a similar position among children who were clearly 3 years older than their 1929 counterparts. Same face, same height, same apparent age, but surrounded by classmates who had visibly grown and matured. Janet noticed my reaction as I studied the two photographs side by side. She leaned in for a closer look, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. "That's odd," she murmured. "This girl looks exactly the same in both pictures. Same age, same everything." I asked if there were any other photographs from the school during that time period. Janet disappeared into the stacks and returned with additional boxes. Over the next 2 hours, we systematically went through class photographs from 1930, 1931, 1933, and 1934. In every single image where this particular class appeared, the girl was there, looking exactly the same age as she had in 1929. By 1934, the other children had clearly grown from elementary students into young teenagers. Their faces had lengthened, they had gained height, the boys showed the first signs of adolescence, but this one girl remained unchanged. Same size, same facial features, same apparent age of 8 or 9 years old. Janet was as puzzled as I was. She had been working with the Historical Society for over 20 years and had never noticed this anomaly before. We began searching through the school records, looking for enrollment lists and student information from that period. The records were incomplete, many having been lost over the decades, but we found enough to create a partial list of students from those years. The girl's name, we discovered, was Sarah Mitchell. According to the fragmentary records we found, she had been enrolled at Millbrook Elementary from 1929 through at least 1934, but there was no birth record, no family information, nothing that would help us understand who she was, or why she appeared to remain the same age across multiple years. Janet suggested we contact some of the town's elderly residents, people who might have attended the school during that period, or whose families had lived in Millbrook for generations. She gave me a list of names and phone numbers, warning me that many of these people were in their 80s and 90s, and their memories of events from so long ago might be unreliable. That evening, back in my hotel room, I began making calls. The first few conversations were frustrating. Most people I spoke with had only vague memories of their elementary school years, and none specifically remembered a Sarah Mitchell. But the fourth person I called, an 87-year-old man named Robert Hayes, had a very different response. "Sarah Mitchell," he repeated slowly when I mentioned the name. There was a long pause before he continued. "I haven't heard that name in decades. Where did you say you found it?" I explained about the photographs and my research with the Historical Society. Another pause, longer this time. "You know," Robert finally said, "there were stories about that girl. Strange stories. I was just a kid then, probably in first or second grade when she was in the older classes. But even as children, we noticed something wasn't right about her. He went on to describe memories that had haunted him for nearly 80 years. Sarah Mitchell, he claimed, never seemed to age or change, not just from year to year, but even within individual school years. While other children would grow taller, lose teeth, change hairstyles, Sarah remained exactly the same. Her clothes were always identical, her appearance never varied, as if she were somehow immune to the passage of time. The teachers never talked about it, Robert continued. At least not in front of us kids. But we could tell they were uncomfortable around her. She never spoke in class, never participated in activities, just sat there watching everyone else. And her eyes, there was something about her eyes that made you feel like she was seeing right through you. Robert's account sent chills down my spine. Here was someone who had actually known Sarah Mitchell, who had witnessed firsthand the same impossibility I was seeing in the photographs. I asked if he remembered what happened to her, if she had ever left the school or moved away with her family. "That's the strangest part," he said. "One day she was just gone. No goodbye, no announcement from the teacher, no explanation." This would have been sometime in 1935 or 1936. We came to school one morning, and her desk was empty. When we asked Mrs. Patterson about it, she just said Sarah wouldn't be coming back, and we weren't to discuss it further. After ending the call with Robert, I sat in my hotel room staring at the photographs spread across the small desk. 6 years of class pictures, and in every one, Sarah Mitchell appeared exactly the same. Not similar, not close, but identical in every measurable way. The lighting anomaly I had first noticed was present in all the images, as if she were somehow existing in a slightly different reality from the other children around her. I spent the rest of the evening examining the photographs with a magnifying glass, looking for any evidence of manipulation or fakery. But these were original prints, developed decades before digital photography and sophisticated image editing became possible. The papers showed appropriate aging. The chemical composition of the emulsion was consistent with the technology of that era. These were authentic photographs, not clever forgeries or manipulations. The next morning, I decided to visit the site where Millbrook Elementary had once stood. Janet had given me directions to what was now a small park on the outskirts of town. The original schoolhouse had been demolished in 1963, replaced by a newer building that served until the district consolidated in the 1980s. Now only a historical marker and some old foundation stones marked where generations of children had once learned their lessons. As I stood among the scattered remnants of the school's foundation, I found myself wondering what Sarah Mitchell's daily experience had been like. Had she been aware of her condition? Did she understand that she was somehow different from her classmates? The questions multiplied in my mind as I photographed the site, hoping to document every aspect of this increasingly mysterious case. Back at the Historical Society, Janet had made additional discoveries. She had contacted the town clerk's office and requested access to birth and death records from the 1920s and 1930s. What she found, or rather what she didn't find, only deepened the mystery. There was no birth certificate for Sarah Mitchell in Millbrook or any of the surrounding towns. No record of a Mitchell family living in the area during that time period. According to official documentation, Sarah Mitchell had never existed. Yet there she was, clear as day in 6 years of school photographs, surrounded by children whose names appeared in enrollment records, whose families were documented residents of the town. It was as if she had materialized from nowhere, attended school for several years, then vanished without leaving any trace in the official record. I arranged to interview 2 more elderly residents who had attended Millbrook Elementary during the 1930s. Both confirmed Robert Hayes' account, though their memories were less detailed. They remembered Sarah as a quiet, strange girl who never seemed to fit in with the other children. One woman, now 89 years old, recalled that Sarah never ate lunch, never brought books home, and never seemed to have parents who attended school events. It was like she wasn't really there, the woman explained, her voice taking on a distant quality as she searched her memory. I mean, you could see her. She took up space. but she was somehow separate from the rest of us, like she was watching our lives from the outside. These interviews painted a picture of a child who existed on the periphery of normal school life, present but not participating, visible but somehow intangible. The more I learned about Sarah Mitchell, the more convinced I became that I was dealing with something that challenged the fundamental laws of nature as I understood them. Determined to find more evidence, I expanded my research beyond Millbrook. I contacted historical societies in neighboring towns, searching for any mention of the Mitchell family or similar unexplained phenomena. This broader investigation led me to Riverside, a town about 30 miles from Millbrook, where I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The Riverside Historical Society had a collection of school photographs dating back to the 1890s. Among them was a class picture from 1915, 14 years before the first Millbrook photograph. In the back row, fourth from the left, stood a girl who was unmistakably Sarah Mitchell. Same face, same age, same impossible clarity that defied the photographic technology of the time. The archivist at Riverside, an elderly man named Thomas Brennan, had never noticed the anomaly before I pointed it out. But once he saw it, he became as fascinated as I was. Together, we searched through their entire collection and found Sarah in photographs from 1916, 1917, and 1918, always the same age, always that same penetrating stare that seemed to look beyond the camera into some realm invisible to the rest of us. According to the school records Thomas showed me, she had been enrolled under the name Sarah Mills at Riverside Elementary. Once again, there was no birth certificate, no family information, no official documentation of her existence beyond her presence in the school photographs. And just like in Millbrook, she had simply disappeared one day without explanation. I was beginning to understand that Sarah's story was far larger than I had initially imagined. This wasn't an isolated incident in a single small town, but part of a pattern that spanned decades and multiple locations. The implications were staggering. If my research was correct, Sarah Mitchell, or whatever her true name might be, had been appearing in school photographs for at least 23 years, never aging, never changing, moving from town to town for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom. The technical impossibility of what I was seeing forced me to question everything I thought I knew about photography, about time, about the nature of reality itself. These weren't trick photographs or clever manipulations. They were authentic historical documents that seemed to document something that shouldn't exist. I decided to digitize all the photographs I had found and subject them to the most sophisticated analysis available. Using professional forensic software, I examined every aspect of Sarah's image across the various photographs. The results were consistent and disturbing. In every image, her portion of the photograph exhibited characteristics that were impossible given the technology and techniques of the respective time periods. The grain structure around her figure was different from the rest of each image. The depth of field didn't match the camera settings that would have been used. The lighting on her face suggested a source that wasn't illuminating any of the other subjects. Most unsettling of all, when I measured her facial features across the span of 23 years, they were identical down to the pixel level. Not similar, not close, but mathematically identical in every measurable dimension. Professional photographers know that even with modern digital cameras and carefully controlled conditions, it's virtually impossible to capture two identical images of the same person. Facial expressions change, lighting varies, the angle shifts by fractions of degrees. Yet Sarah's face remained constant across decades, as if time itself had no power over her image. My investigation had evolved from a simple photo restoration job into something that challenged my understanding of the possible. Each new discovery raised more questions than it answered, and I found myself drawn deeper into a mystery that seemed to exist at the intersection of documented history and inexplicable phenomenon. As I prepared to travel to other towns in my search for more photographs of Sarah, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not in any supernatural sense, but with the growing awareness that my research might be attracting attention from people who preferred that certain mysteries remain unsolved. The very fact that Sarah's existence had been so thoroughly erased from official records suggested that someone, at some point, had made a deliberate effort to hide the truth about who she was and why she never aged. The breakthrough I'd been hoping for came from an unexpected source. While reviewing my notes from the various historical societies, I remembered that Thomas Brennan at Riverside had mentioned their collection included some personal diaries and journals donated by former students and teachers. I called him back, asking specifically if any of these documents mentioned unusual students or strange occurrences at the school during the 1910s. Thomas spent several days going through their archives before calling me back with news that sent my investigation in an entirely new direction. He had found the personal journal of Eleanor Hartwell, a teacher who had worked at Riverside Elementary from 1914 to 1920. Her entries from 1915 and 1916 contained detailed observations about a student she referred to only as the peculiar child. I drove back to Riverside immediately to examine the journal firsthand. Eleanor Hartwell's handwriting was small and precise, her observations methodical and detailed. What I read in those faded pages provided the first real insight into Sarah's behavior and the effect she had on those around her. The new student arrived without introduction or explanation, one entry read. Principal Morrison simply informed me that she would be joining my class, though no enrollment papers were provided. When I asked about her previous school records, he became evasive and suggested I focus on her current education rather than her background. Eleanor's entries painted a picture of a child who attended classes but never truly participated in school life. Sarah never spoke unless directly questioned, and even then her responses were minimal and strangely formal. She never brought lunch, never carried books home, and never seemed to have supplies of her own, yet somehow always had whatever was needed for the day's lessons. Most troubling of all, Eleanor wrote, is the way she observes the other children. Not with the natural curiosity of a young student, but with the analytical detachment of someone much older studying specimens in a laboratory. I have caught her staring at individual students for extended periods, as if memorizing every detail of their appearance and behavior. The journal entries became increasingly disturbed as the months progressed. Eleanor documented several incidents where Sarah demonstrated knowledge she shouldn't have possessed. During a history lesson about the Civil War, Sarah corrected Eleanor on specific details about battles that weren't covered in the textbook, providing information that Eleanor later verified was accurate but obscure. When another student fell ill, Sarah accurately predicted the course of the illness, including symptoms that wouldn't manifest for several days. I have begun to suspect that this child is not what she appears to be, Eleanor wrote in an entry dated March 1916. Her knowledge extends far beyond what any 9-year-old should possess, and her manner of speaking, when she does speak, suggests an adult mind operating within a child's form. I have attempted to discuss my concerns with Principal Morrison, but he refuses to address the matter directly. The most chilling entry was dated just days before Sarah's disappearance from Riverside Elementary. Eleanor had stayed late to prepare lessons and noticed a light still on in her classroom. When she investigated, she found Sarah sitting at her desk in the empty room, staring out the window at the setting sun. When I asked what she was doing there so late, she turned to me with those unnaturally penetrating eyes and said, watching them grow older, the way she spoke those words with such profound sadness made my blood run cold. I asked her what she meant, but she simply gathered her things and walked past me toward the door. As she reached the threshold, she paused and said, I remember when you were young, Miss Hartwell. You had such hope in your eyes. I am 26 years old and have lived my entire life in this county. There is no possible way this child could remember me as anything other than what I am now. Eleanor's final entry about Sarah was brief but deeply unsettling. She is gone. No explanation, no goodbye. Simply an empty desk where she once sat. When I asked Principal Morrison about her absence, He claimed to have no knowledge of any student by that name. When I showed him the attendance records bearing her name in my own handwriting, he stared at them for a long moment before saying, "Perhaps it would be best if we never spoke of this again." This journal provided crucial confirmation that Sarah's presence had been deliberately obscured by school administrators, suggesting a conspiracy of silence that extended beyond individual witnesses. The pattern was becoming clear. Sarah would appear at a school, attend for several years without aging, then vanish, leaving behind only confused memories and administrators eager to forget she had ever existed. Armed with this new information, I began reaching out to historical societies and archives across New England, searching for any mention of similar incidents. My inquiries led me to discover a network of researchers and historians who had encountered similar anomalies over the years. Most had dismissed them as record-keeping errors or photographic oddities. But when I began sharing my findings, a disturbing pattern emerged. Dr. Patricia Caldwell, a historian at the University of Vermont, had documented 3 cases of children who appeared in school records for extended periods without showing signs of aging. Professor Michael Chun at Dartmouth College had found similar anomalies in his research on rural education in early 20th century New Hampshire. None of them had connected these isolated incidents until comprehensive database of SI began compiling eightings. Together, we discovered that Sarah, or children matching her exact description, had appeared at schools across New England between 1890 and 1950. Always the same age, always the same unsettling presence, always leaving behind the same pattern of confused administrators and deliberately obscured records. The geographical distribution suggested a methodical movement from town to town, as if following some predetermined route or schedule. Dr. Caldwell had access to photographic collections from several Vermont historical societies. When I asked her to search for images matching Sarah's description, she found her in photographs from schools in Brattleboro, Manchester, and Woodstock. The dates ranged from 1923 to 1938, overlapping with her appearances in Massachusetts, but suggesting she was somehow present in multiple locations simultaneously. This revelation forced me to consider possibilities that strained the boundaries of rational explanation. Either there were multiple individuals who shared Sarah's exact appearance and mysterious properties, or she possessed abilities that allowed her to exist in several places at once. Neither option aligned with any known understanding of human biology or physics. Professor Chen contributed photographs from New Hampshire schools that showed Sarah in Concord, Portsmouth, and Hanover between 1905 and 1942. His research had uncovered teacher testimonials similar to Eleanor Hartwell's journal, describing students who demonstrated impossible knowledge and seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time and development. One particularly detailed account came from a teacher named Margaret Foster, who had worked at a school in Portsmouth from 1920 to 1945. Her memoir, published privately in 1960, contained a chapter titled "The Student Who Never Grew," that provided the most comprehensive description of Sarah's classroom behavior I had yet encountered. According to Margaret's account, Sarah had enrolled in her 3rd grade class in 1925 and remained there for 7 consecutive years, never advancing to the 4th grade despite demonstrating advanced knowledge in all subjects. School administrators claimed she was being held back due to social immaturity, but Margaret observed that Sarah's understanding of complex topics far exceeded that of children her apparent age. She would sit quietly during arithmetic lessons, Margaret wrote, then solve complex mathematical problems that I had planned to introduce to my students the following year. When I asked how she knew these concepts, she would simply say she had learned them somewhere else. But when pressed for details about her previous education, she would become evasive and redirect the conversation to other topics. Margaret's memoir described incidents where Sarah demonstrated knowledge of historical events that hadn't occurred yet. During a lesson about World War I in 1926, Sarah made casual references to economic conditions and political developments that wouldn't manifest until the early 1930s. When Margaret questioned these statements, Sarah claimed she had misremembered something she had read, but the accuracy of her predictions became undeniable as the years progressed. The memoir also documented Sarah's strange relationship with time itself. Margaret noted that Sarah seemed to know exactly when the school day would end, when unexpected visitors would arrive, and when various students would be absent due to illness, often days before these events occurred. She appeared to exist in a temporal framework that extended beyond the present moment, aware of future developments in ways that defied explanation. Most disturbing was Margaret's description of Sarah's reaction to the aging process in others. As Margaret grew older during their 7 years together, she noticed that Sarah would sometimes stare at her with what appeared to be profound sadness. When Margaret asked about this behavior, Sarah replied, "I'm sorry you have to get older. I wish I could help you stay the way you are now." The memoir concluded with Sarah's disappearance in 1932, following the same pattern I had documented elsewhere. One day she was present, the next her desk was empty, and school administrators claimed no knowledge of her existence. Margaret's attempts to find official records of Sarah's enrollment were unsuccessful, as if all documentation had been systematically removed. These accounts from multiple teachers across different decades painted a consistent picture of a child who existed outside normal temporal boundaries. Sarah wasn't simply failing to age physically. She seemed to possess knowledge and awareness that spanned years or decades beyond her apparent experience. The implications suggested something far more complex than a medical condition or genetic anomaly. I began to suspect that Sarah's appearances at these schools weren't random, but followed some deliberate pattern or purpose. The timing of her arrivals and departures, the consistent duration of her stays, and the systematic erasure of her records all pointed to coordination by some unknown authority. Someone or some organization was orchestrating Sarah's movements and ensuring that her existence remained hidden from official documentation. This realization led me to examine the broader historical context of her appearances. Sarah's documented presence spanned the period from 1890 to 1950, encompassing major historical events, including 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and significant social and technological changes. Her movement between communities suggested she might be observing or documenting these changes, collecting information for purposes I couldn't begin to understand. The teacher's accounts consistently described Sarah as an observer rather than a participant in normal childhood activities. She watched other children play but never joined them. She listened to lessons but rarely asked questions. She seemed to be studying human behavior and development rather than experiencing it naturally. This pattern suggested a scientific or research-oriented purpose behind her presence in these schools. My investigation had evolved far beyond its original scope as a photo restoration project. I was now documenting what appeared to be systematic surveillance or research being conducted by an entity that could manipulate its apparent age and potentially exist in multiple locations simultaneously. The implications for our understanding of human nature, time, and reality itself were staggering. As I compiled my findings into a comprehensive report, I couldn't shake the feeling that my research was being monitored. Several times I noticed the same individuals in different locations where I was conducting interviews. My phone calls to historical societies were sometimes met with unusual reluctance to discuss certain topics. Library archivists who had been helpful initially became evasive when I requested access to specific collections. The pattern of official amnesia surrounding Sarah's existence suggested that powerful interests were invested in maintaining her secrecy. The systematic removal of records, the coordinated silence of administrators, and the consistent erasure of documentation pointed to an organization with significant resources and influence. Whatever Sarah represented, someone was determined to keep her existence hidden from public knowledge. My research had uncovered evidence of a phenomenon that challenged fundamental assumptions about human development, time, and the nature of identity itself. Sarah Mitchell wasn't simply an anomaly in a few old photographs. She was part of something larger and more complex than I had initially imagined. The truth about who she was and why she never aged remained elusive, but the evidence for her existence was undeniable. As I prepared to dig deeper into this mystery, I realized I was crossing into territory that might be dangerous for someone in my position. The systematic cover-up of Sarah's existence suggested that revealing the truth might have consequences I wasn't prepared to face. But the historian in me couldn't abandon the investigation now, not when I was so close to understanding one of the most extraordinary mysteries I had ever encountered. The enhanced photographs that had started this entire journey sat on my desk, silent witnesses to an impossible truth. Sarah's unchanging face stared back at me across decades, her eyes holding secrets that might reshape our understanding of what it means to be human. Whatever the risks, I knew I had to continue searching for answers, even if those answers led me into realms that science had yet to acknowledge or explore. The weight of my discoveries pressed heavily on my mind as I sat in my hotel room that night, surrounded by photographs and documents that painted an impossible picture. I had documented Sarah's presence across 60 years and multiple states, witnessed the systematic erasure of her existence from official records, and read first-hand accounts from teachers who had struggled to comprehend what they were experiencing. Yet despite all this evidence, I felt no closer to understanding the truth about who or what Sarah Mitchell really was. My phone rang at exactly midnight, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed only a blocked number, and when I answered, there was a long silence before a woman's voice spoke. "Mr. Chun, I understand you've been asking questions about certain historical anomalies." The voice was cultured, professional, with no trace of accent or regional inflection. Questions that might be better left unanswered. My pulse quickened as I gripped the phone tighter. "Who is this? How did you get my number?" "That's not important. What matters is that you understand the delicate nature of your current research. Some discoveries are meant to remain buried in the past, forgotten by time and circumstance." I glanced at the photographs spread across my desk, Sarah's unchanging face visible in several of them. "Are you talking about Sarah Mitchell?" Another long pause. "I'm talking about your safety, Mr. Chun, and the safety of the people you've been interviewing. Elderly individuals with fragile memories can be quite vulnerable when pressed to recall events that may or may not have occurred decades ago." The implicit threat was clear, but it only strengthened my resolve. These people aren't fragile. Their memories are consistent and detailed. They're describing something that actually happened. Memories can be unreliable, especially when influenced by suggestion or wishful thinking. Perhaps it would be wise to focus your talents on less controversial subjects. Family portraits, wedding photographs, graduation pictures. Safe, normal restoration work that doesn't venture into areas beyond your expertise. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone for several minutes, my mind racing with implications. Someone was monitoring my research closely enough to know exactly what I was investigating and whom I had contacted. The timing of the call, precisely at midnight, suggested a level of surveillance that went far beyond casual interest. Rather than deterring me, the threatening phone call convinced me that I was on the right track. Someone with significant resources was invested in keeping Sarah's story hidden, which meant there was definitely something worth hiding. I spent the rest of the night securing copies of all my research, uploading files to multiple cloud storage accounts, and preparing backup documentation in case my primary materials disappeared. The next morning, I received an email that made my blood run cold. It was from Janet Morrison at the Millbrook Historical Society, and the subject line simply read, "Important Discovery." When I opened the message, I found a single sentence, "Found another photograph you need to see immediately." I called Janet within minutes of receiving the email. Her voice sounded strained, almost frightened, as she explained what she had discovered while organizing some recently donated materials. A family named Henderson cleaned out their grandmother's house last week and brought US several boxes of old photographs and documents. I was going through them yesterday evening when I found something that made me think of your research immediately. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. It's a family photograph, dated 1943. The Henderson family posed in front of their house for what appears to be a Christmas portrait. But there's someone else in the picture, standing slightly apart from the family group. A young girl who matches the description of your Sarah Mitchell exactly. My hands were trembling as I wrote down the details. Same apparent age, same facial features, identical as far as I can tell. But here's the disturbing part, David. I showed the photograph to Mrs. Henderson's grandson, the man who donated the materials. He has no idea who the girl is. According to him, his grandmother never mentioned having any additional children in the family, and none of the relatives he's spoken with recognize her. Janet's discovery represented a significant shift in the pattern I had been documenting. Until now, all of Sarah's appearances had been in school settings, captured in formal class photographs. This was the first time I had found evidence of her presence in a private family context, which raised entirely new questions about her purpose and methods. I arranged to meet Janet at the Historical Society that afternoon to examine the Henderson family photograph. The drive to Millbrook felt longer than usual, my mind churning with possibilities and concerns. The threatening phone call from the previous night had made it clear that powerful interests were monitoring my investigation, which meant I needed to be more careful about how I proceeded. When I arrived at the Historical Society, Janet was waiting for me with the Henderson materials spread across the same table, where we had first examined the school photographs months earlier. The family portrait was immediately recognizable as a 1940s Christmas photograph, with the distinctive clothing styles and formal posing typical of that era. The Henderson family consisted of 6 members: grandparents, parents, and 2 teenage children, all arranged in a traditional family grouping in front of a decorated evergreen tree. But standing to the left of the group, slightly separated from the main arrangement, was unmistakably Sarah Mitchell. Same face, same age, same penetrating stare that seemed to look beyond the camera. What struck me immediately was how out of place she appeared in the family setting. While the Henderson family members were all smiling and relaxed, clearly comfortable with each other and the photographer, Sarah stood rigidly upright with her characteristic expression of detached observation. She wore a simple dress that appeared identical to those I had seen in the school photographs, despite the 13-year gap between this image and her last documented appearance at a school. Janet had contacted the photographer's studio, which was still in operation under new ownership, hoping to find additional information about the session. The current owner had searched through their archived records and found the appointment book entry for the Henderson family portrait. According to the notes, the session had been scheduled for 5 family members, but 6 people had appeared for the photograph. The photographer's assistant, who was still alive and living in a nursing home in the next town, remembered the session clearly despite its occurrence nearly 80 years ago. Janet had spoken with her by phone, and her account was both illuminating and disturbing. According to the assistant, the Henderson family had arrived for their scheduled appointment, but they were accompanied by a young girl they claimed was a distant relative visiting for the holidays. The family seemed uncomfortable discussing the girl's presence, offering vague and contradictory explanations when the photographer asked about including her in the portrait. Mrs. Henderson kept looking at the girl strangely, the assistant had told Janet. Not like family looks at family, but more like she was trying to figure out who this person was and why she was there. The girl never spoke during the entire session, just stood where she was positioned and stared at the camera. The evidence I've presented today represents just the beginning of what may be one of the most profound mysteries in documented American history. Sarah Mitchell, or whatever her true identity might be, existed in our world for over 60 years without aging a single day. She moved through our communities, observed our children, and somehow evaded every attempt at official documentation while leaving behind an undeniable photographic record of her impossible existence. The systematic cover-up surrounding her story suggests that powerful forces understood the implications of what she represented long before I stumbled upon that first enhanced photograph. The threatening phone calls, the coordinated silence of administrators, the deliberate erasure of records all point to a truth so extraordinary that it has been hidden from public knowledge for nearly a century. I continue my investigation despite the risks, driven by the conviction that some mysteries demand answers, regardless of the consequences. If you have family photographs from New England schools between 1890 and 1950, I urge you to examine them carefully. Look for faces that seem too clear, too sharp, too aware for their supposed age. Look for children who appear to exist slightly outside the normal flow of time and space. And if you find something unusual, something that challenges your understanding of what's possible, don't dismiss it as a photographic error or a trick of the light. Document it, preserve it, and remember that truth has a way of revealing itself to those brave enough to seek it. The story of Sarah Mitchell is far from over, and somewhere in dusty attics and forgotten archives, more pieces of this impossible puzzle are waiting to be discovered.